This is the case of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Trigger warning. This case has mentions of sexual assault and murder. Born on February 29, 1960, Richard Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas. Ramirez claimed that his father physically abused him and that he sustained multiple head injuries at an early age. One injury was so severe that it reportedly caused him to have epileptic seizures. To escape his violent father, Ramirez spent a lot of time with his older cousin Miguel. He was a Vietnam veteran. Unfortunately, Miguel's influence wasn't that much better than his father's had been. During his time in Vietnam, Miguel had sexually assaulted, tortured, and even dismembered several Vietnamese women, and sickeningly, he had the photographic evidence to prove it. He often showed little Richie photos of the horrors he inflicted upon the women. And when Ramirez was just 13 years old, he witnessed his cousin fatally shoot his own wife. Shortly after the shooting, Ramirez began to transform from a scared, abused boy to a hardened, sullen young man. From developing an interest in Satanism to becoming addicted to drugs, Ramirez's life took a dark turn. Even worse, he was still under his cousin's influence, since Miguel had been found not guilty of the murder by reason of insanity. Miguel ultimately spent just 4 years in a mental hospital until he was released. Before long, Ramirez developed an obsession with the same kinds of sexual and physical violence that Miguel had inflicted on the women in his photos. Ramirez also began to have more run-ins with the law, especially after he moved to the Los Angeles area in California. Though most of his early crimes in the late 1970s and early 1980s were related to theft and drug possession, it would only be a matter of time before they escalated to unspeakable violence. For a long time, Ramirez's first murder was believed to have taken place on June 28, 1984. It was then that he killed 79-year-old Jenny Vincow. Not only did Ramirez stab and sexually assault his victim, he also slashed her throat so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. But decades after Ramirez was arrested in 1985, he was also linked by DNA evidence to the murder of a 9-year-old girl, which took place on April 10, 1984, months before the Vincow murder. So that may well have been his first killing, unless there were more that happened before that. After the Vincow murder, it would be several months before Richard Ramirez struck again. But when he did, he pursued his depraved impulses with horrific dedication. On March 17, 1985, Ramirez's murder spree began in earnest with an assault on Maria Hernandez in her home. Though Hernandez managed to escape, her roommate Dale Okazaki was not so lucky. That evening, Okazaki became another one of Ramirez's murder victims. But Ramirez still wasn't done. Later that same night, he shot and killed another victim named Tsai Lian Yu. A little over a week later, Ramirez murdered 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and his 44-year-old wife, Maxine. Sickeningly, it was then that Ramirez began to establish his signature attack style: shoot and kill the husband, then assault and stab the wife. But his murder of Maxine was especially ghastly, as he'd gouged out her eyes. For months, Ramirez would continue to stalk and murder more victims in California, striking fear in the hearts of all people throughout the state. One of the most terrifying things about Ramirez was that he was willing to kill just about anyone who crossed his path. Unlike some other serial killers who just have a type, Richard Ramirez murdered both men and women and preyed on victims both young and old. He murdered indiscriminately. At first, it seemed like Ramirez was only attacking people near Los Angeles, but he soon claimed a couple of victims near San Francisco as well. And since the press dubbed him the Night Stalker, it was clear that most of his crimes happened at night, adding yet another scary element. Disturbingly, many of his attacks included a satanic element as well. In some cases, Ramirez would carve pentagrams into his victims' bodies, and in other cases, he would force victims to swear their love for Satan. All over California, people went to bed fearing that the Night Stalker would break into their homes while they slept and perform an unspeakable ritual of sexual assault, torture, and murder. Since he apparently attacked at random, it truly seemed like no one was safe. The LAPD increased their presence on the street and even created a special task force just to find him, with the FBI lending a hand. Meanwhile, the public anxiety was so intense around this time that there was a noticeable surge in the sales of guns, lock installations, burglar alarms, and attack dogs. But ultimately, it was Richard Ramirez's own mistakes in August 1985 that led to his capture. After he was spotted outside a witness's home, he accidentally left a footprint behind. He also left his car and license plate in plain sight. When the police tracked down the vehicle, they were able to find just enough of a fingerprint to make a match. By that point, they had already received tips that someone with the last name of Ramirez was involved. Sure enough, the LAPD was able to identify Richard Ramirez thanks to their new computer database of fingerprints. And even though the records only included criminals who were born after January 1960, it just so happened that Ramirez was born in February 1960. Authorities soon found Ramirez's mugshots from his prior arrests, and one of his surviving victims came forward with a detailed description that was quite similar to the photos. By the end of August 1985, police decided to release the Night Stalker's image and name. Though they initially worried that this would give Ramirez a chance to escape, it turned out that he was blissfully unaware of his newfound publicity until it was too late. By pure happenstance, Richard Ramirez was traveling back to Los Angeles when his photo was released, so he didn't realize that he had been tracked down until he was back in the city. He saw his own face on the newspapers. Though he attempted to flee the police and tried to steal a car in the process, he was tracked down by a vigilante mob that recognized him, in part due to Ramirez's notoriously bad teeth. They beat him up until the police finally closed in. After his arrest, Ramirez was found guilty of 13 counts of murder. In addition to the murder charges, Authorities also found him responsible for committing several sexual assaults, regular assaults, and burglaries. Ramirez was sentenced to death in the gas chamber for his crimes. Holy sh! And he smiled in response. The Night Stalker later said, "I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all. That's it." He was held in San Quentin State Prison for the rest of his life, but he was never put to death. Due to the complicated nature of his case, which included a 50,000-page trial record, the state's Supreme Court wasn't able to hear his appeal until 2006. And even though the court rejected his claims, additional appeals would have taken several more years. During this extended delay, Richard Ramirez met a female admirer named Doreen Leoy, who had struck up a correspondence with him, and in 1996, he married her while he was on death row. "He's kind, he's funny, he's charming, yeah, okay, my ass, bro," Leoy said 1 year later. "I think he's a really great person. He's my best friend, he's my buddy." Obviously, most people did not share her feelings. For the countless Californians who lived in terror during the mid-1980s, Ramirez was little better than the devil that he worshipped. "It's just evil. It's just pure evil," said Peter Zazara, the son of victim Vincent Zazara, in 2006. "I don't know why somebody would want to do something like that, to take joy in the way it happened." Ultimately, Richard Ramirez died of complications from B-cell lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system, in 2013. He was 53 years old. While he was alive, the Night Stalker never expressed remorse for any of his crimes. In fact, he often appeared to take pleasure in his infamy. "Hey, big deal," he said, shortly after getting the death sentence. "Death always comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." This is the case of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Okay, so this is post-recording Brandon here, and I'm checking out Doreen Leoy, Richard Ramirez's wife. I thought this was pretty interesting, so I'm just gonna leave this in as like a little excerpt in the middle of two things. So if this is like really random, sorry. This is the story of Doreen Leoy. Almost immediately after Richard Ramirez was arrested, Doreen Leoy realized that she was attracted to him. She wasn't deterred by the fact that he was found guilty of horrific crimes, from slashing a woman's throat so deeply that she was nearly decapitated, to gouging another victim's eyes out. Leoy also didn't mind his Satanism, which he flaunted during his trial. Doreen Leoy remained unconvinced of his guilt, and even though she was not the only woman who sent Ramirez love letters, she was by far the most persistent. Leoy sent him 75 letters in 11 years. Lord Almighty. Leoy also became his most ardent defender in the public eye, sometimes even praising his character in interviews. "He's kind, he's funny, he's charming," she told CNN. "I think he's a really great person. He's my best friend. He's my buddy." On November 7, 1989, Ramirez was sentenced to death. As he languished on death row at San Quentin State Prison, Leoy was his most frequent visitor. According to Los Angeles Times reporter Christopher Goffard, who visited the facility while conducting an unrelated interview and spotted Leoy, She appeared to be drawn to Ramirez's vulnerability. Gaffard explained that she met with Ramirez about 4 times per week, and she was usually the first visitor in line. While she often spoke of his innocence, she rarely gave any real answers as to why she was with him. When directly asked, Leoy would just say, "Hometown girl makes bad." What does that mean? I feel like... Okay, what the this next paragraph. Okay. "People call me crazy or stupid or lying," she complained, "and I'm none of those things. I just believe in him completely. In my opinion, there was far more evidence to convict O.J. Simpson, and we all know how that turned out." Okay. I think she's just clout chasing, I'm not gonna lie. Okay. Though she was widely reviled by the public, Leoy was determined to get hitched to Ramirez, and so on October 3, 1996, prison staff secured a visiting room for the couple and allowed them to get married, much to the disdain of the families of Ramirez's victims. On their wedding day, Doreen Leoy bought a gold band for herself and a platinum one for Richard Ramirez, since he had already explained to her that Satanists don't wear gold. Okay. With vending machines lining the walls and plastic chairs bolted to the ground, a seemingly traditional wedding was underway. The pastor removed the line "Until death do you part" from the official proceedings. Okay, that's kind of funny. While Richard Ramirez's wife was enamored with her husband, her friends and family were in shock. Relatives disowned her, and journalists couldn't understand why she had upended her life to be with Ramirez. Leoy admitted that she knew why people found her marriage odd. She said, "It'd be hard for me to understand if my best friend came to me and said, 'You know, this guy, Timothy McVeigh, who just got convicted, I think he's really cute, and I'm gonna write to him.' I mean, I would think that's kind of strange." So she's self-aware, so like, why, bro? Okay, and yet, Richard Ramirez's wife continued to vigorously defend her husband. But for all her efforts, she had to come to terms with the fact that he wouldn't give her the one thing she really wanted: children. "I love children," she said. "I've never made any secret to him that I wanted 5 or 6 children. But that dream didn't come true for me, and I've just replaced it with a different dream, which is being with Richard." Ultimately, their relationship most likely did not end well. Although Ramirez's obituary didn't include any mention of a divorce, Leoy and Ramirez reportedly did not see each other for a few years before he died. It is unclear what drove the couple apart, but some believe that the 2009 evidence that he murdered a 9-year-old in 1984 was too much for Leoy. Others argue that Ramirez's health problems led to the couple's separation. Ultimately, Ramirez was never executed, but instead died of complications from lymphoma. Meanwhile, Leoy has been absent from the public eye for several years. It's unclear whether she ever reconciled with her loved ones, and her whereabouts today remain unknown. And this is the story of Doreen Leoy.